Do you also cringe when you hear people over the age of 50 use the word woke as a catch-all phrase to describe radical leftist positions and attitudes? Well, they're not wrong, technically, but when asked to explain what woke is, their answers show that their thought process, it doesn't extend beyond what GB News or what Fox News told them. So today I'm going to uncover the truth of what woke really is and where it has originated. This is a topic that could be deep dived for hours, but I'll cover enough here just for the best general understanding and a stepping off point, so if you wish to look into yourself, you have this foundational knowledge to start with. Now first I want to start with my own journey on finding this out, and this was back when the term woke wasn't even used. Instead it was the social justice warriors, or SJWs. That was the label used to describe the radical and irrational left. Now this was back in 2015. I would wake up, I would watch Tucker Carlson in the morning, and even watch those Ben Shapiro videos. You know, the Ben Shapiro owns liberal with a truth bomb, or Ben Shapiro destroys feminists. Ben Shapiro bulldozes entire Palestinian village with facts and logic. It's funny to look back on these now, but this was essential to my journey. Just as reading Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens when I was 13, I thought I was the smartest kid around back then, but it's funny to look back on now. But back in 2014, I read something that helped open my eyes. Not fully, but allowed me to step on the right path to where I am now. And this book, Righteous Indignation by Andrew Breitbart. And yes, it was that Breitbart, the Israel is our greatest ally news outlet. But this book had a very peculiar chapter, which essentially detailed Breitbart's own red pill. But he missed out some key information that had explained enough for me to take my own conclusions to the next level.
To me, my one discovery, my one great epiphany, my one aha moment that I said, I got it, I see what exactly happened with in this country. The Frankfurt School were emigres from
Germany.
Germany. It was the equivalent of this, the Hoover Institution. What the Hoover Institution is to Stanford University, the Frankfurt School was a think tank at the University of Frankfurt, and they were social scientists like Herbert Marcuse, Antonio Gramsci, Horkheimer, Adorno. These were all a bunch of guys in the middle of World War II who had suffered in Europe, 2 world wars in a row, and they had been fighting, they had been fighting the Nazis, and they were trying to figure out another aspect of how to how to spread Marxism around the world. You could go to Bolivia, you could go to Bulgaria, and you could go to the peasant class, and you could say, let's flip this place. The Marxist-Stallman argument of getting the workers to get upset at the owners was very easy, but not in America, where the middle class was invested in their productivity, invested in the concept that they could have their own small little American dream, a white picket fence, that they could invent something and go from one generation to being dirt poor to being an owner within a very quick period of time.
And so while the origins of woke can be traced back to many sources, the most important one that needs to be underlined and understood is the Frankfurt School of Thought. And so Breitbart argued this was their masterstroke. Instead of overthrowing governments, they sought to infiltrate and destabilize the cultural foundations of the West, this being family, religion, education, and traditional values.
They came up with, at the end of the day, we could call it cultural Marxism, but at the end of the day, we experience it on a day-to-day basis. And by that I mean a minute-by-minute, second-by-second basis. It's political correctness and it's multiculturalism. And what it took was this amazing concept of e pluribus unum, where everybody comes here and contributes to this, everybody becomes an American and contributes, but we have a common culture, we have a common border, a common mindset. What they did was take the haves versus have-nots friction and translated it into oppressor versus the oppressed. And
this got taken up by faculties across the country.
That's
the point of the Frankfurt School and the progressivism.
They
it becomes embraced by 60s
post-structuralism,
academics.
Post-structuralism, queer studies, African American studies. All of that is pitting people against each other. It is anti-American to its core.
And he does raise another interesting point, that when people observe communism in the 20th century, it's not comparable to the immense brutality that was used in Cambodia, the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, the methodology of imposing this ideology is completely different to how it's done in the West. In the West, it's done through a longer period of time by subverting institutions and traditions of the nation it is infecting. And over time, like a frog in boiling water, the deconstruction of the country you were raised in, 20 years later, it becomes unrecognisable. And just as an aside, what is the end result of this goal in its rawest, purest form?
The left loves equality. It believes we're all the same, or we must be treated the same. And they believe that as a morality, as a moral good which will be imposed. Under communism, Pol Pot shot everyone who'd read a book that he didn't approve of. Why did he do that? Because he wanted everyone to be the same and everyone to think in the same way. Asiatics have a form of description. It's called the tall poppy syndrome. They look at the plants, they decide one's a bit out of kilter, it's standing higher than the others, so you snip it down so all are the same. Pol Pot's not his real name, by the way. It's a joke name, it means political potential. When he was very young, Maoists wrote down, this man has political potential, Pol Pot. And that's where he took it from. This man is a terroristic psychopath. That when he took over his society with a teenage militia high on drugs, and almost everything had been blitzed and was defenceless, he put into practice, in a cardinal way, what many of these Western idiots in the 60s with their fist in the air had been proposing. He sat in Paris, in salons, listening to Kristeva, listening to Sartre, listening to de Beauvoir, and he imposed it implacably like the cretin he was. The family's immoral. Shoot all the Buddhist priests that have got people married. Shoot people who are a bit too keen on marriage. Shoot everyone who's read books about marriage. Shoot everybody who's ever said marriage is a good thing. That's quite a pile of bodies and you haven't started yet. That is communism in its rawest and its crudest form. It's a sort of morality of bestiality, essentially. And it can't even impose equality. Because in the communist societies of yesteryear, the elite will have its own shops, and its own channels, and they will have their own corrupt systems to keep their children out of military service, and so on. Or just like sort of Clinton's America or Vietnam America before it. Every elite in that sense will recompose, despite the figment.
But unfortunately, Breitbart didn't connect all the dots. He still uses the phrase Judeo-Christian to describe the values of America, even though, when you look at the leading figures of the Frankfurt School he was exposing, let's just say very few of them were Christian. And it was sad to see him pass away so young of a heart attack, just after he posted some tweets alluding to John Podesta being involved in a sex trafficking ring, affiliated with the debunked Pizzagate scandal. In short, this was where James Alefantis, real name James Rothschild, and interestingly, Jimmy l'Enfantis in French literally translates to I like children. He apparently headed a sex child trafficking ring operation in a pizza parlour, Comet Pizza, which tied many politicians together. But there's no basis for this crazy theory. But anyways, many of those affiliated with the Frankfurt School left Germany in the 1930s. And not surprisingly so, as certain ways of thinking and the promotion of so-called degenerate and subversive ideas were being literally burnt on the street. The ideas didn't go away, they simply moved away, and Breitbart identified the new epicenter became the west coast of the United States, California. And just as a quick aside on the book burnings, what sort of material do you think was being destroyed here? Well, this burning took place on the Institute of Sexual Science in Berlin. This is where Magnus Hirschfeld, which if you're wondering, yes he is, he developed research and treatment for various matters regarding gender, sexuality, and included the first transgender operations. And so some of the ideas from the Institute of Sexual Science, they migrated to the United States and further found development in the intellectual circles associated with the Frankfurt School. The immigration of scholars from this institute to the United States allowed their pioneering work on sexuality to continue and influence new developments, particularly through the Frankfurt School's critique of modern society.
Early on, Fromm embraced the ideas of Frankfurt School fellow Wilhelm Reich, who felt that psychological problems largely stemmed from sexual repression, and said that sexual liberation from societal mores could cure large numbers of people. Reich, whose psychoanalysis included disrobing his patients and then touching them, helped place the foundations of modern feminism, arguing that the repression of the sexual needs creates a general weakening of intellect and emotional functioning. In particular, it makes people lack independence, willpower, and critical faculties. Marriage, he wrote, ruins lives. Marital misery, to the extent to which it does not exhaust itself in the marital conflicts, is poured out over the children. Fromm also expanded on the parenting ideas of Lukács and John Dewey, who rejected parental authority, telling parents to stand by and let their children reinvent the wheel through experience. Fromm's philosophy was imbibed by a young socialist student named Benjamin Spock, who would go on to shape a generation of parents with his child-rearing book, The Common Sense Book of Baby and Child Care. But all of these major contributors to the Frankfurt School of Thought paled in comparison to Herbert Marcuse, the founder of the New Left. He also worked in the Office of Strategic Services, the pre-CIA OSS. He really hit his stride in 1955, however, with the publication of Eros and Civilization. The book essentially made Wilhelm Reich's case that sexual liberation was the best counter to the psychological ills of society. Marcuse preferred a society of polymorphous perversity, which is just what it sounds like, people having sex every which way with whatever. It wasn't so much the freshness of Marcuse's message that made the difference, it wasn't a fresh message, as his timing. The kids brought up with Fromm and Freud and Spock were coming of age. The misplaced guilt of the greatest generation brought forth a new generation free to embrace Marcuse. While similar philosophies of sex had failed in the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s, by the 1950s, the men and women who had suffered through the Great Depression and fought in World War II were determined to raise privileged kids who would never have to actually fight for their country or work for their food. The result was a group of kids ready and able to participate in the sexual revolution promised by the Frankfurt School. Marcuse excused sexual promiscuity as the fulfillment of the need for the people to rise up against Western civilization and to free themselves of the sexual repression it created. Not a hard sell for teenagers. It was no wonder that in a very real sense, his followers believed they were doing something special when they made love, not war, a slogan attributed to Marcuse himself. They were using their sexual energy to bind the world together rather than destroy it, as sexual repression would do.
And the consequences of this school of thought over several decades is why things are the way they are now. This is now normal. You're being desensitized to this every minute of every day. Consider those born in 2010 and beyond. The world you were born into, whether that's the 1980s or 1990s, it may as well be the 1890s to this new generation. And the ideas from the Frankfurt School, in my opinion, have accelerated year on year, pushing us into a new state of decay that over time will become the new normal again.
When you are ruled by liberal ideas. We've been ruled by liberal ideas for many centuries, but in the most acute form in the last 50 years. Liberal ideas say that men and women are the same and are interchangeable, that war is morally bad, that all races are the same and should all live together, that a population that just exists in a country is just a zone, is just an economic area, that everything's based on nationalism and materialism and is purely a calculation of economic self-interest. Now there will be millions of our people who say, what is this chap talking about? This is all abstraction. Go out there in the street and you see the example of a society that's based on these sorts of ideas.
The values, which are now foundational in the West since the Second World War, are used as weapons against its own population. And this is the end result of liberalism, which is essentially a soft form of communism, as the population is not forced, but eventually coerced into believing its values to be true, even though they are the main reason for the decline of which we observe.
But in this society, liberalism has learned how to rule in a far more sophisticated way. Towards the end of the quasi-Stalinist days in Czechoslovakia as well, secret policemen were looking under people's beds for abstract paintings and jazz music and this sort of nonsense. The West allows people who dissent just to think in their own little boxes and doesn't give a damn. doesn't bother to ban books because 40% of the population can't read them anyway. This is how liberalism rules. It doesn't allow the privilege of dissent because it disprivileges dissenting ideas. And if people can't think and those ideas aren't worth anything anyway, it's invisible. Yes. And therefore you don't even need to quote-unquote persecute. You can put economic pressure on people. So you've got a choice to be sort of decanted from bourgeois life if you manifest in public certain types of opinion. That's one of the pressures that's put on people. That's done deliberately to stop people who have education forming the head, forming a brain, forming an elite for the fist.